There was a part of me that always wanted to write and always wanted to tell stories. But there was also this part of me that was very practical and felt that I needed to have a profession and I needed a job. And so I decided to go to graduate school and study literature at Columbia University. My goal, I think, was to have 2 kids and have an academic appointment. But the problem is I began writing while I was in graduate school, and I started writing and writing and writing. And I had a nice fellowship from Columbia University, but really what I was doing was writing short stories and writing poetry. And I lived across the hall from a woman who played rock and roll music very, very loud. And one day I knocked on her door and I said that, I asked her if she'd turn her music down. And she yelled at me. We had this huge fight, screaming fight in the hall. And I never asked her to turn her music down again. Instead, I moved to a quiet part of the International House at Columbia University. And I was living there for about 6 months when a gentleman poet from Pakistan said to me that he was organizing a poetry reading and he wanted me to read my poems. Well, I'd never shown anything of my own writing to anyone. I'd written for many, many years. I had piles and piles of paper and drawers full of things that I just never had the courage, and I think this also has to do with being a woman, that I felt that I wasn't empowered enough to literally open the drawer and show that work, to somebody. So this Pakistani poet said to me that he was organizing a poetry reading and he wanted me to show him some of my poems and that he would have me read at the reading. Well, I said to him, I don't have any poems and I don't write poetry. And he said, well, you're a graduate student in literature, so of course you write poetry. And I would like to come to your room later and see some of the poems. Well, it didn't sound like I didn't really know what he wanted. But at any rate, I pushed him away for a few days. And after 3 days of insisting, I said, all right, stop by after dinner and I will show you my poems. And in fact, he came up and I opened a drawer. And that was, for me as a woman, that was a moment where I thought, gee, I kept writing these things and writing them and throwing them in the drawer, never had the nerve to show them to anyone. And he sat down, and I sat in a chair behind him and watched for about an hour as he turned pages of my own, the most private thing I could have imagined, him reading my poems and reading page after page. At the end of which he looked up at me and said, "You're a very good third-rate writer." Well, I thought, did I have to open the drawer, for that? I mean, I could have kept the drawer closed for that. And he said, no, these are very good. He said, Shakespeare is a first-class writer. He said, Anne Sexton John Donne is a second-class writer. Anne Sexton is a third-class writer. And I thought, okay, I can do that. If that's where if I'm there, that's all right. I can be there. So he said, he picked 3 or 4 poems, and he said, I want you to read these out loud at this poetry reading. And I got into the room, and sitting right in the first row was my enemy, this woman who I'd had this fight with. I need a drink of water. Marcia was her name. So Marcia was sitting there, and I thought to myself, I can do anything, but I can't possibly read this to Marcia. But I read them, and that for me, again, the only way I know how to, I like to tell stories, so I'm telling you a story in a sense about what it means to me to be a woman writer. And I read those poems to her out loud. And at the end of it, Marcia came up to me and she said, if I'd known you were writing those poems, I would have kept my music down.